All right, here we are once again talking becoming retail. And we're going to hone in on the six leadership principles that we actually identified in an introductory blog on salesforce.com entitled Becoming Retail, a new series that puts people in the heart of digital transformation. And let's start at the top, which is setting vision. We actually, to substantiate what this means, went out and surveyed hundreds of leaders globally. And what we found is 23% identified themselves as strategy setters. So those that have a longer term view on the business and look to curate the organization's ideas and inspiration to really pull it together to drive action and agility and ultimately execution. And I feel like what really brought it to life for me was an interview, Michelle, you did just recently with Alicia Erdman from Aria. So can you talk a little bit about what you heard and what you learned from that discussion?
Definitely. Alicia is probably one of the best thinkers in strategy. She was a principal at BCG before jumping over to the retail side of things, where she held strategy roles at Gap, Nike, and now at Ariat. So it was a pleasure to speak to her. She's the quintessential strategy setter in my mind. And she had a really good, simple view on what strategy meant, which is setting an objective within the appropriate context. So if you want to go international, does your product resonate internationally, right? There's your objective and there's your understanding the context. But a key thing to remember is that the context is always changing. And she gave the pandemic as a great example, right? We didn't see this coming. You couldn't have planned for it. And so your strategies and your objectives had to change as a result of the influence of the pandemic. She really has this framework for strategy that I also admire, which is understand the context, gather the insights, define your objective, and build your narrative. So it's all about the context, the objective, having the data to support those things, and then the ability to tell your story about where you're headed to get everyone bought in, both investors, the organization. But again, keeping in mind that those things will change, that the context does change. So you have to be flexible in your strategy in order to remain relevant. And Rob, you've also had a distinguished career in strategy. You're now VP of Strategy and Insights here at Salesforce. What do you think about what Alicia said? What is your philosophy around strategy?
Well, I've learned so much through this process about leadership and candidly about myself and my thoughts on strategy. And yeah, I like to think that strategy is as much about connecting the dots based on what others have said or thought or whatever data is sitting out there. And really what really struck me as a conversation as part of the series we had with Dave Finnegan, who's the Chief Experience Officer at Orvis. And he really challenged us in terms of the term set vision, because he said it's less about him putting a vision out there and hoping people will come and rally around it, but rather harnessing the organization, as I mentioned before, more of a curator. And that, as I think about it, is a lot of what I've done throughout my career is just having data, having insights, having people's perspectives, and being able to curate that to tell really compelling stories. And when I heard your discussion with Alicia, what really struck me was a point she made, and it was in the context of data, intelligence, and insights, which is this emerging, she called it translator role. It's one thing to be able to crawl through the data and put together some sort of visualization, but it's another thing, according to her, and I totally agree, is be able to tell stories based on that data, the translator function. And that's what I've had a lot of fun doing throughout my career. It's less about what I think, but it's more about connecting those dots.
I definitely agree. My experience at Euromonitor, the market research firm, we had millions, the company still does, millions of data points, but how do you make sense of it? You could pull it up in an instant, but what does it mean? So I enjoyed my role there as translating those data into international insights. in order to help companies move their business forward. And I'm enjoying my role here at Salesforce, which is more about strategy in the age of digital transformation, what technologies are going to impact the market. So again, I love the data, and then telling the stories around the data is definitely a passion of mine.
Yeah, and lastly, to your point around enabling action, it's one thing to set or curate the vision, but it's also, especially given the times we're living now, being able to be agile, be able to understand where your strategy is today, but knowing how you can also get really scrappy in order to listen to your customers and actually respond in a meaningful way. So, thanks so much, Michelle, for sharing your insights, the insights of other leaders that we're talking to along our journey to becoming retail.